Today I'm going to show you how to put new brake rotors and wheel bearings on an old GM car. This is a 1975 Pontiac Grand Prix that I've been working on. There she is there. Great big old mid-70s boat. And we've pretty much rebuilt the front end on this. Check out the other videos. But we've done shock springs, ball joints, brake parts, steering components, everything. We're ready to do the rotors and wheel bearings. So these new rotors come with the bearing races pressed in already. So we're just going to do the cone part of the bearing and grease them up and get them in there. So for this job we need obviously the rotor, the bearing races which are already pressed in there, the two bearings, so there's a big one and a small one. The small one goes on the outside, just sits in there. The big one just sits in the inside. And like that. And the oil seal, or the grease seal. So that just gets tapped into place there. Brake clean to clean up the oil that's put on at the factory on these rotors, to clean all that off so it doesn't contaminate the pads and smoke. Wheel bearing grease for the bearings, which we'll pack those next, and some rags. Brake cleaner. Next step is to pack the bearings. So you take your wheel bearing grease and your bearing. You can buy bearing packers, which you put the bearing in, and basically there's different designs, but the basic idea is you have some sort of a like a cylinder or something that pushes the grease through the bearing. And if you're doing a lot of bearings, it's probably a good thing to get. I don't have one of those. So what we can do is just take some grease, put it in the palm of your, kind of the palm of your hand there, and you work the grease into the bearing. So you want to see, you just kind of turn the bearing and sort of push the grease into it. After a while you get a feel for doing this. It's been a long time since I've done one of these. But you want to just keep basically pushing that grease into the bearing until you see it coming out the other side. Eventually you'll see it coming through the other side, and that means the bearing's packed. If you're using, these are new bearings, but if you're using your old bearings, you need to clean them up in some solvent first, and then let the solvent dry, and then push the new grease in. You'll see the new grease pushing out the old grease on an old bearing. But this is how I'm going to do it. So just keep working this in until the bearings are full. Okay. When your bearing's getting full, you know you're done. As you continue to push this grease in, you start to see it coming out the other side. You can see it's pushing through the other side. So when it's like that all the way around, right, try and work that grease in there. See, it's coming through the other side, so as much grease that will fit in there has fit in there, and it's pushing out the other side, so it's full. Once you get that happening all the way around, you can see the little pieces of grease pushing through the other side. That bearing's packed. Alright, once the bearing's packed, you can set it into the rotor here. Put a little bit of grease on the inside in the race. You don't want to pack this full of grease. You just need a little bit on the inside. Smear it around in there. And I'll put somewhere, we're going to put the seal in too, just to help the seal slide in a little better. Okay. Pop the packed bearing in like that. Just sits in there nice like that. And we'll put the oil seal in. And just tap this in with a little hammer carefully around the outside. Until it's seated. Just put a little bit of grease around the inside of that seal too. Now it's ready to go on the car. Alright, putting the rotor on the spindle. Put a little bit of grease on first. Grab the rotor. Feel it slip on there. Then the other bearing is going to go on. You put a little bit of grease around that race. So the other bearing can get tucked in there. You'll feel it kind of seat in there. And then there's this little washer. There's a key on it, so it can only go in one way. Looks like it was sitting against a bearing that way before. I don't think it really matters. And then the spindle nut. Spin it back and forth as you tighten the nut, and I'll get a wrench in a minute to make sure it's tightened properly. You could use channel locks on here, or a crescent wrench. I've got a proper size socket, so I'm going to use that. So you just want to turn it both ways, make sure that bearing's seated. Those bearings are seated, but you don't want to over tighten this. This style of bearing, you're better to have it a little bit sloppy and a little bit loose. Like if you grab your tire and move it back and forth, and there's a little bit of play there, you're better off that way than having this too tight. Because if this is too tight, those bearings will burn up pretty fast. I just want to make sure it's on all the way. Spin it back and forth a few times. And then once you've got it like that, then you just want to back the nut off counterclockwise till you can get the first cotter pin. Like, it should really be about finger tight once it's seated. Your cotter pin goes in. I'll put that in later, but you put your cotter pin in. So, like I said, have it tight. Not super tight, just like tight like this kind of tight, right? And then back it off to the first cotter pin hole. And then your cotter pin goes in. And that's it. Thanks for watching.